Hey everyone, welcome back to the English Medium Podcast. This is your calm little corner of the internet where English meets real life. Not the textbook version, but the version that walks with you through your day, your routines, and those weird little moments when you suddenly start thinking too much.
Yeah, the version you can listen to on the bus, while cooking, while cleaning, or while pretending to answer emails when actually you are just staring into space and processing your entire existence. We support all forms of responsible multitasking, obviously.
Absolutely. And today we are doing something a little different. No complicated grammar topic, no long list of phrases to memorize and forget tomorrow. Today is more personal, but still very useful for your English, because language becomes real when it connects to your life.
That is exactly it. If you can describe what is happening in your life, you are not just practicing English. You are practicing awareness. And awareness is where change starts. Even if it starts quietly, even if it feels small, even if it takes a while to notice.
So here is the question for today. It is not a scary question, just a quiet one. If your life right now had a movie title, what would it be? Something honest, something funny, something dramatic, something that feels a little too true for comfort.
Dangerous question. People might discover things about themselves they were not ready to admit out loud. But that is also the point. Maybe your title is something like Still Figuring It Out, or Trying but Tired, or Slow Progress but Real.
Or maybe yours is dramatic, like Main Character Energy, Loading. The point is not to sound impressive. The point is to name what your life feels like right now, because once you can name it, you can begin to understand it a little better.
And that is why this episode matters. Sometimes we do not realize how we are living until we try to describe it. A simple title can expose a pattern, and once the pattern is visible, it becomes harder to ignore, which is honestly both uncomfortable and useful.
Let's start simple. Most people do not choose a bad life on purpose. They do not wake up and say, "Today I will slowly build a life that makes me feel stuck." It usually happens quietly, one tiny decision at a time.
No one writes that in their planner. Nobody says, at 9 a.m., I will create a pattern that makes me tired for the next 3 years. It is never that dramatic. It is usually smaller than that, which is exactly why it is so easy to miss.
Exactly. You skip something once, then delay something twice, then ignore something 3 times, and suddenly it becomes normal. Not because you wanted it, but because repetition has a funny way of turning a temporary choice into a permanent feeling habit.
And that word matters, normal. Once something feels normal, you stop questioning it. It might be unhealthy, boring, lonely, or draining, but if it becomes familiar enough, your brain starts treating it like home, and that is where things get complicated.
Right. And for learners, let's make that clear. When we say something is normal, we mean it feels usual, expected, and not surprising anymore, even if it is not good, even if it is not helping you. Familiar is not always the same as healthy.
So maybe your normal looks like this. You wake up tired, you do what you have to do, you tell yourself, I'll start tomorrow, and then tomorrow repeats yesterday. It is not one huge disaster. It is a loop, and loops can feel very convincing.
And that is the scary part. It does not always feel like a problem. It can feel stable, even polite, even manageable. You do not panic, so you assume everything is fine. But sometimes the absence of panic is exactly what keeps the problem alive.
Let's talk about that word fine, because it sounds harmless. It sounds calm. It sounds like no one needs to worry. But fine can hide a lot of things, and one of them is a life that is quietly shrinking.
Yes. Fine is like a soft pillow that slowly turns into a trap. It is comfortable, but it keeps you still. It does not scare you, which is why it is so effective. You can stay in fine for a long time without ever noticing that you have stopped growing.
When life is bad, you react. When life is amazing, you grow. But when life is just fine, you pause. And not always for a few minutes, sometimes for months, years, maybe longer. That is the hidden danger of being too comfortable.
And pause does not always look like doing nothing. Sometimes you are very busy. You answer messages, attend meetings, clean the kitchen, finish tasks, and stay in motion all day. But underneath all that motion, there is no forward movement at all.
That distinction is huge. Busy does not always mean progressing. You can have a full schedule and still be emotionally, mentally, or personally stuck. That is why people sometimes feel exhausted but cannot explain why, because effort is happening but direction is missing.
Let me ask you something, Mike. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly realized time had passed much faster than you expected? Like you blinked and several months were already gone?
Oh, absolutely. Too many times. It is like saying, I will fix this later, and then later becomes next week, then next month, then somehow a year. The calendar keeps moving even when your decisions do not, which is a very rude feature of time.
Exactly. And the moment of realizing that feels strange because nothing dramatic happened. There was no huge disaster, no loud breakdown, no cinematic explosion, just ordinary days stacking on top of each other until one day you notice the pile.
And then you ask yourself, when did this become my life? That is a heavy question, but also an important one, because it is often not one terrible event that creates dissatisfaction. It is accumulation. It is repetition. It is a slow drift.
That is why small choices matter so much. People think transformation has to begin with a grand gesture, but sometimes it begins with a tiny moment of honesty, like, wait, I do not actually want this to be my normal anymore.
So what creates change? Because awareness alone is not enough. Realizing something is wrong does not automatically fix it. You can know the truth and still stay still, which is frustrating, but also very human.
Yes, awareness is like turning on the light. It helps you see the room, but you still have to walk across it. You still have to move your body, choose a direction, and do the next thing. Insight is powerful, but it is not the same as action.
So what actually moves people? Usually one of two things, pain or clarity. Pain is the obvious one. Something hurts enough that you can no longer pretend it is okay. It forces change because staying the same becomes more expensive than changing.
But clarity is quieter. It is when you suddenly see your life clearly and think, if I continue like this, nothing is going to change. That realization is gentle, but it can be incredibly strong. It does not shout. It just stops lying to you.
And honestly, clarity can be more powerful than pain because it arrives before the collapse. It gives you a chance to act before life forces you to. It is the moment when you start choosing change instead of being pushed into it, which is a big difference.
Here is something important. Your brain is not designed to make you successful. It is designed to keep you safe. Safe, comfortable, predictable. Not brave, not ambitious, not necessarily growth-oriented.
Exactly. Your brain loves patterns because patterns save energy. If something has worked before, even badly, your mind may still choose it just because it feels familiar. Familiar feels safer, safer feels easier, easier feels logical, and that is how traps survive.
So when you want to change, your brain starts offering very reasonable sounding excuses. Maybe later. Not today. This is enough. You are overthinking. You do not need to rush. It sounds responsible, but sometimes it is really just fear in a nicer outfit.
And that is the tricky part. The voice of resistance does not always sound dramatic. It can sound calm, wise, and practical. It can say, be realistic, when what it really means is stay exactly where you are, because movement is uncomfortable.
For English learners, this is a useful phrase too. Reasonable does not always mean correct. Something can sound reasonable and still lead you nowhere. That is why we have to notice not just what we think, but where those thoughts are trying to take us.
So, how do we break this pattern? Not with big motivation, not with a perfect speech in the mirror, not with the magical energy of new year, new me. Those moments can feel exciting, but they fade fast if nothing changes underneath.
Right. Big motivation is emotional, but temporary. It gives you a rush, then disappears, and suddenly you are back where you started. Only now you also feel guilty because you believed the hype. That is why sustainable change needs something quieter.
So, what works? Small actions, repeated, even when they feel boring, especially when they feel boring. Boring is where consistency lives. Boring is where habits are formed. Boring is not glamorous, but it is incredibly effective, which people forget.
Small actions lower the resistance. Your brain may reject a huge promise, but it can usually accept a tiny step. One page, one walk, one honest conversation, one 5-minute practice session. Small enough to start, small enough to repeat.
And repetition is the real magic. Not because it feels exciting every day, but because repeated action changes identity. You stop being someone who plans to change and start being someone who actually does the thing, even in a small way.
Let's make this very practical for your English and your life. Instead of saying, I will become fluent in English, say, I will speak for 5 minutes today. That is a real action, and real actions can be completed.
Yes, because your brain resists giant promises. Giant promises feel impressive, but they are easy to break. Small promises may not look dramatic, but they are trustworthy. And trust, over time, builds momentum much better than excitement does.
Exactly. Small actions do not feel impressive at first. They may even feel too easy, almost silly. But they are powerful because they are repeatable. A small thing done every day becomes a direction, and direction matters more than intensity.
I think people underestimate how much confidence comes from keeping tiny promises to yourself. If you say, I will read 1 page, and you actually do it, your brain starts to believe you. That belief is not loud, but it is very, very important.
And confidence is not always a feeling. Sometimes it is a record of evidence. You remember the things you did, not just the things you hoped to do. That record slowly becomes your identity, and identity shapes what you think is possible.
Now, let's talk about something deeper, because not everyone listening feels fine. Some people feel tired, uncertain, or just lost. They're not sure what the next step is, and even choosing a direction feels overwhelming.
If that is you, I want to say something clearly. You do not need a perfect plan. You need a direction. A perfect plan can become another reason to wait, because perfect plans are hard to build. Direction is simpler. Direction lets you begin.
That is such an important distinction. A direction can be vague at first. It can be something like, I want more energy, or I want to speak more confidently, or I want a life that feels less heavy. You do not need the whole map on day one.
Exactly. People sometimes think if they do not know the full answer, they should do nothing. But uncertainty is not a stop sign. It is often just a sign that you are at the beginning of the road, not the end of it. Beginning is messy.
And messy beginnings are still beginnings. You can be confused and still move. You can be afraid and still move. You can be inexperienced and still move. Movement does not require perfect clarity. It requires enough honesty to take one step.
Rebuilding does not happen in one big moment. It happens in small decisions. The decision to get up when you do not want to. The decision to try again after a failure. The decision to speak even when you feel awkward.
And those decisions are quiet. Nobody always claps. Nobody always notices. Sometimes you are the only one who knows you kept the promise, faced the fear, or pushed through the resistance. But that private effort is not small. It is the foundation.
People often want a dramatic transformation, but real rebuilding is usually slower and less glamorous. It is not fireworks. It is repetition. It is choosing what helps you more than what feels easiest in the moment, which is a subtle but powerful shift.
And if you are learning English, this is useful too. Rebuilding a skill is very similar. You do not become fluent by waiting for confidence to arrive first. You practice, stumble, repeat, and improve. Confidence often shows up after action, not before it.
That is such a good point. So many people wait until they feel ready, but readiness is often built through doing. You do not magically feel prepared and then start. You start, and then preparation begins to appear inside the effort.
Let's change one idea. You are not behind. You are in progress. That shift matters because behind sounds like failure, like comparison, like a race you are losing. Progress sounds like motion, like possibility.
Yes, behind makes your life sound like a scoreboard. Progress makes it sound like a journey. And journeys have stages. They have pauses, detours, rest stops, awkward hills, and slow stretches. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are moving.
Sometimes people look at others and think, they are so far ahead, and I am late. But late compared to what? Another person's timeline is not your timeline. Your life is not a competition with everybody else's highlight reel. It is your own path.
Exactly. The goal is not to become someone else's version of successful. The goal is to become more honest, more grounded, more capable, and more aligned with the life you actually want. That is a much calmer and more useful definition.
And once you see yourself as in progress, you stop demanding perfection before you begin. You give yourself room to learn. You allow the process to exist without turning every mistake into a verdict on your worth, which is freeing.
So let's finish with something simple. Not a big plan, not 10 goals, just one step. Ask yourself, what is one small thing I can do this week that future me will thank me for?
That question is powerful because it shifts your attention from guilt to action. Future you does not need you to solve everything. Future you just needs a little support, a little momentum, and a little evidence that you are still trying.
Maybe it is practicing English for 5 minutes. Maybe it is going for a walk. Maybe it is sending the message you have been avoiding. Maybe it is sleeping earlier. Small steps can be surprisingly meaningful when they are chosen honestly.
And honestly, that is often where change begins. Not in a grand speech, not in a perfect Monday, not in a sudden burst of motivation. It begins when you do one useful thing before you feel fully ready, and then you do it again.
That is how a new normal starts. Not overnight, but gradually. One action becomes two. Two become a habit. A habit becomes a pattern. And a pattern becomes a life that feels a little more yours, which is the real goal here.
Of course, the old loop may come back. That is normal too. You might wake up tired again, you might lose motivation again, you might hear that lazy voice say, "See, nothing changed." That does not mean you failed.
Right. It means you are human. Change is rarely a straight line. Some days feel strong, some days feel weak, and some days feel like you are starting over. But starting over is not the same as being broken. It is often just another part of learning.
And when that happens, be gentle with yourself, but not passive. Gentle means you don't attack yourself for struggling. Not passive means you still choose one small useful action. Both matters. Kindness without movement can stall. Movement without kindness can burn you out.
That balance is everything. If you fall off track, do not turn the moment into a story of failure. Turn it into information. What happened? What got in the way? What is the smallest next step I can take now? That is a much healthier question.
I like that. Information instead of punishment. That is how adults grow, honestly. Not by pretending they never slip, but by responding to the slip without drama and without denial. You learn, adjust, and keep going, even if the pace is slow.
And for anyone learning English, this kind of conversation is useful because language sticks when it carries meaning. Words like normal, progress, clarity, and direction are not just vocabulary. They are tools for thinking.
Exactly. If you can talk about your life in English, you build more than vocabulary. You build confidence, reflection, and emotional range. You learn how to say what is real, not just what is correct, and that is a huge part of becoming fluent.
So, if you are practicing, try this. Say one sentence about your current phase of life. Something simple like, I am figuring things out, or I am trying to build better habits, or I am learning to be more patient with myself.
That is excellent practice. It is real, personal, and practical. And it helps you see that English is not only for exams or work. English can also be the language you use when you are making sense of yourself, which is powerful.
Exactly. Language is not just communication with other people. Sometimes it is communication with your future self. Sometimes it is the bridge between where you are and where you want to go. That is why reflection matters so much.
So if your life had a title today, maybe it would change after this conversation. Maybe it was trying but tired, and now it is trying but moving. Maybe it was fine, and now you realize fine is not enough. That kind of shift matters.
And maybe your title does not change immediately. That is okay too. Sometimes the first step is just noticing that the current title is no longer the one you want to live under. That awareness is quiet, but it opens a door.
If a door is open, you do not have to run through it. You just have to notice it. Then one day you take a step, then another. That is how people rebuild. That is how patterns change. That is how ordinary lives become more intentional.
So be patient, but do not be stuck. Be kind, but do not disappear. Rest when you need to, But keep a small promise to yourself. That is not a dramatic life hack. It is just a steady way forward. And steady is more powerful than people think.
All right, that is today's episode. If this made you think even a little, that is already progress. And if you want to practice your English, write your movie title in the comments. We read them, and honestly, they are always amazing.
We really do read them, and we love seeing the different ways people describe their lives. Some are funny, some are honest, some are surprisingly poetic, and all of them help you practice expressing real thoughts in clear English.
So go ahead and try it. Do not overthink it. Just one title, one line, one honest snapshot of where you are right now. That is enough for today. And if your title changes later, great. That means life is moving.